Are you a youth pastor who is frustrated with your teenagers being apathetic to sharing their faith with other people? Well, in today's episode of Beyond the Youth Room podcast, we are going to be talking about apathy versus urgency, why teens aren't sharing the faith, and how we as youth leaders can change that. So stay tuned for today's episode. If you think that evangelism is urgent and should be urgent, are you training them on how to do it?
But the reality is that when they understand that the gospel can actually help people with the hell they're going through, now there's an urgency to share.
The first question of every single small group is, did you share the gospel with anyone this week? Like, does anyone have any stories of how they share the gospel so they can share with their group?
I mean, Jesus had 120 and then called out and 12 stepped up.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to understand that we can't make kids, but we can set the environment and set the temperature to where kids will rise to that. And so there's
disciple maker. If you have like 10% or higher of your group that's in chair 4, like making disciples, that is like, you're going to notice a difference.
Yeah, because it says that Jesus looked out on the crowd and he had not apathy, but he had compassion. Mm-hmm. And so how do we actually get them to a point where they look out upon the lost and have compassion towards them?
Now, Ryne, we are both youth pastors that have figured everything out, and we're just teaching other, youth pastors that don't know what they're doing, how to actually do it. No, this is not the case at all. We are students of youth ministry. If that makes sense.
Students of student ministry.
Students of student ministry. We are constantly learning. I think that's what makes us a little bit, effective as far as because we don't feel like we've figured it all out, which, we're constantly learning and adapting. And one of the things that we just launched recently was our online community for youth leaders, our youth ministry mastermind. And that was a place that we created, one, just to kind of share our knowledge and what's working, in our own youth ministries, but also so that anybody can participate or learn or even contribute, to the pool of knowledge when it comes to, shared experience and sharing what's working in youth ministry around the country right now, around the world,
actually. Around the world, yeah.
So far in there, we have South Africa, we have Philippines, we have
Singapore,
Nigeria, we have Singapore, we have UK, Canada, and then of course tons of states across the United States already represented in there. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing inside of there is really fun. I get excited about a lot of things, but I'm really excited about this school community. And so if you are watching this and you haven't joined it, or listening to this and you haven't joined it, make sure you check the links in the show notes so we can get you involved in that, so you can be participatory in seeing what the Lord can do through a mastermind of youth pastors.
Yeah, well, and this episode actually is born from this. So what we did is we went through all of the things that we had heard from the youth pastors and leaders who joined, and we looked at the pain points. We saw one of the biggest one is, well, actually the most common one was youth pastors and leaders saying, I'm struggling with motivating my students to share their faith.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're like, let's tackle that in an episode too. So if you join the school community, and let us know.
It's a live feedback loop.
Absolutely.
So we get to hear from youth pastors that are in the trenches, and then we get to just share what things are working on those topics. So, so I think, one, you're not alone if you feel that way, based on even just the responses that we've gotten in the community. That's the most common one so far. Many of our students are apathetic toward evangelism. It's no big surprise. They don't see it as a priority or feel a sense of urgency to share their faith. And so the question is, how can we as youth leaders, maybe even some parents that are watching this, instill gospel urgency in this generation? Mm-hmm. Now, let's start by reversing back a little bit. What are some of the roots of apathy? Like, what are some of the things that we believe are causing the apathetic nature of, how students are approaching their faith, and they're just comfortable. They're just, apathy in general is, if you've never heard the word or need to define, it's basically just meaning like you don't care. Like you're apathetic. You don't care enough to take action on something. And I don't think, I was just thinking through some of these aren't going to be any surprises, but maybe you guys can relate to this, of some of the roots of apathy that we found in this generation that are kind of unique to this generation. Because we can say, well, teenagers in general, they have different things going on. Their hormones are raging. They, that's like not changed in history. Like they're always, but I think this generation specifically, we have a lot more cultural distractions. So entertainment, social media, I think even adults are very distracted. Like we just started at our church, my wife and I, we started teaching a parenting class this past Sunday. And one of the feedback that we got from, all the parents in there, they were like, yeah, we need to put our phones down more. Like, I mean, and that it's because I shared that,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not even, exempt from this. Like, even though I know the destructive nature of it.
Yeah.
So anyways, with that, I think, it's no surprise that our teenagers are more distracted by entertainment, social media, busy life, and that crowds out spiritual priorities. So one, I don't even think that they're intentionally being apathetic. They're not like,
No.
oh, I know this is important, but I'm choosing not to do it. I just don't think they're even thinking about it because they have so many other things going on in their brain. Like they're just easily distracted. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think right now it's the real question here is not how we motivate them necessarily. It's how do we get them to see, the need, because it says that Jesus looked out on the crowd and he had not apathy, but he had compassion. And so how do we actually get them to a point where they look out upon the lost and have compassion towards them?
Which that leads to our second one, I think is a huge root of apathy, is that they don't even have that personal connection with others. Like generations past have. And I think that lack of personal connection is kind of twofold. One, they might even lack that just spiritual intimacy with Jesus, to where they see the burden that Christ has for people, and that's why he came. Luke 19:10, Matthew 9, where we see he looked upon the crowds and he saw a forest, but he saw individual trees. Like he had compassion on people. But I think even though our communication, our social media, like there's more, quote, friends online than ever before that people have, but there's still loneliness is skyrocketing. Like we have such a lonely generation that is disconnected from that deeper connection. And so even if they're not even in proximity, or if they're only seeing the positive elements that people are posting on social media, they're like, these people don't need Jesus. Like, look how amazing their lives are. Like, they don't really see the brokenness that their friends are experiencing if they only see them online. So many kids may know about Jesus, but lack that personal relationship with him, but also they don't have that personal connection with other people, like in previous generations. And so, and then the last one for possible roots of apathy that I was just thinking through was, this one's always been a thing. I bet you if you asked even adults and Christians in many different scenarios why they don't share their faith, I would say, what would you say? Like a top 5 reason for why people don't share their faith?
Yeah, they might not have non-Christian friends. They might be, if you're in a church, sometimes they're surrounded by a church, and they don't really see the needs. That would be probably the one of the biggest ones that I hear from people.
Yeah. And I think this generation, so that goes back into like the lack of that personal connection. But I think there's still like always that fear of rejection. It's like, what if I lose a friend over sharing my faith with them? Or what if, like I lose all my friends because I speak up for Jesus?
Yeah.
And I think that's emphasized a lot more in our cancel culture, where it's like, they might even see, it's like, if you speak out against something and it's not what the crowd wants, they're going to cancel you. Like they're going to make sure that you're destroyed, and you're not going to have any friends, and so I think, that's maybe heightened or emphasized more in the cancel culture, is that fear of rejection. So I think the fear of peer rejection or fear of judgment might paralyze kids from actually opening their mouth about Jesus. Yeah. But I think that's only if they're, one, not distracted, and two, they actually care about their friends. I think those two are like preliminary. And then it's like, okay, well then, but I still might be, rejected because of this. So that's like, if they're caring and, and not distracted, and also connect with other people's needs. So how can we shift that perspective? How can we actually create gospel urgency? So that's actually one of the things that we teach on in our student missionary training. That's I believe a key component of motivating students to share the gospel, to live out their faith in the context of their schools. And so, yes, we have gospel urgency. We have gospel fluency, so like teaching them how to share the gospel, and then gospel strategy, kind of how to start a gospel movement. We go through all three of those in our student missionary training, which is completely free. And we've had now, I think it's up to like 1,300 students that have trained this year, something around that. And so when it comes to even just shifting that perspective of why gospel urgency matters, how do we actually do that?
Yeah. Well, and it's a multifaceted issue, but I want to understand that, like you said, it's not a new issue. Jesus had 120 and then called out, and 12 stepped up. Yeah. And so I think we need to understand that we can't make kids, but we can set the environment and set the temperature to where kids will rise to that. And so there's so many various ways we can do that. But I absolutely, agree that we need to get them to have compassion for the lost and to, one, understand that the gospel, as we talked about in the student missionary training, it's not for when you die. Yes, it is, but the reality is that when they understand that the gospel can actually help people with the hell they're going through, now there's an urgency to share. Because if I have a friendship and it's like, well, they need to know Christ before they die, it's like, hey, well, okay, well then later. I'll tell them later, or I'll tell them at another time, versus, hey, like this can actually help them with what they're going through. Doesn't mean their life's going to be perfect, but when we paint the gospel as something that can save people from the hell they're going to, not just the hell they're going through, now there becomes an urgency to actually go and share that, because I realize, hey, I have the answer to what they're looking for right now. Yeah. And so why wouldn't I share that if I really care about them and love them? So I think the biggest thing, and I know we're going to get into the practical ways of how to do this, but the biggest thing is to get them to understand the gospel in their own lives.
Well, let's set some expectation too. So, I mean, you've had a tremendous amount of growth in your youth ministry, and that's been primarily from students being vocal about their faith, to their friends, whether sharing the gospel or inviting them to your youth ministry where you present the gospel every week. Would you say that 100% of your students have that urgency
at the highest?
Is that even an expectation? I know.
Yeah, no, but I have the number. So at our highest peak, 58% of our kids had shared the gospel with a lost friend in the past 3 months. So 58% is like the high water mark. Normally it hovers around 40 to 50%.
Okay. I would even say that that's abnormally high.
Yeah, I would
for
agree with
most
that.
youth ministries.
I would agree with that.
I don't think I have those stats on ours right now, but I would say it's lower. And I would say even just using like an 80-20 rule, 20% of your youth ministry is probably going to be more all in than, and we even talk about the 4 chairs model, disciple maker. If you have 10% or higher of your group that's in chair 4, making disciples, that is you're going to notice a difference.
Yeah.
And so if you're a youth leader and you have, say 10, 20 students, it's the average, youth ministry in America is 12 students, I think. Ironically, it's the same amount of students.
Got to watch that one.
Yeah. Judas was, Anyway, so we have, so we have on average, 12 students or so. If you have just a few students that are sharing the gospel, that's actually good. So don't feel like you're losing if you just have a few students that are all in. And because so let's just manage expectation that it's probably not going to be 100%. Although we'd pray for, we'd work towards that. Of engaging every student in sharing the gospel and having the urgency. But I think even just presenting an eternal perspective, teenagers, they're very focused on the now. So that's why they make unwise decisions. It's because they just want what's now, not caring about their future. So that, that could just whatever feels good in the moment is kind of the cultural norm. And so even just shifting that perspective in our teaching, in our culture, what we communicate to our students of, hey, look, we're living for an eternity, not just the next moment or the next day. And what matters in eternity, what does matter when you spend eternity with God, just that little blip on the radar screen of our life, just a vapor, a sneeze, and then it's over. So what you do now, though, will impact how your eternity goes. And so even just, shifting that eternal perspective, as you mentioned, compassion for the lost, helping them to develop a heart for the lost friends. One thing that we've implemented that's helpful, I've done it myself and it's been helpful, is I set an alarm clock for 8:08 every morning. B.O.B. is 8:08.
Not the artist, but Bob.
Bob.
Yes.
And I pray for Bob every morning, and that's a burden for the lost, opportunities to share the gospel, and then boldness to use those opportunities to share the gospel. And since we started doing that, just praying for it, we've had more students have compassion on their friends. Just it's kind of like when you buy a different vehicle, whatever. It's say I bought a Honda Pilot, an old Honda Pilot recently, and I see them everywhere now. Yeah. Just because it's it's on my mind now. So whenever it's on our mind, we see more. And so I think, if we pray more for the lost, we're going to have more compassion for the lost. We're going to see the needs of other people. And then just highlighting the Great Commission, that it's not age specific, as we were just talking about. It's, it's our responsible to share the gospel and the good news with everybody. Hebrews 10, faith comes from hearing, and, and how will they hear if someone doesn't tell them? So Yeah, so we want to make sure we're emphasizing just the responsibility of believers to be witnesses. Not everybody's going to be an evangelist, but every believer is a witness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move into some practical ways to inspire gospel urgency. Do you have some suggestions?
Yeah, well, we put together our top six,
Yeah.
or our top five, excuse me. But the first one, is, you have to prepare yourself to hear this one, because we got to be honest.
Yeah.
Our students are not always a exact mirror image of us, but we do see that a disciple, when he is fully trained, will be like his master. And so the number one way to create gospel urgency in your students is to model that gospel urgency in your own life.
Yep.
And so when we model evangelism, kids see it, and we know that spiritual things are most often caught, not taught. And so that's why Jesus, his ministry was on this earth. It wasn't just, hey, I'm just going to give you this book and I'm just going to drop it down and you guys figure it out. It's like, no, Jesus came, Philippians 2, took on humanity to his deity. Yep. So not only could he fulfill the law and the prophets, but also so he could model this for us. And so you think the disciples had no doubt, they didn't have the New Testament yet, but they had no doubt how to do this because they saw it modeled in Jesus. And then Jesus said, I'll give you my spirit to give you the power to do that. And so we see that, look, when we share our own successes, failures, when we blew the opportunity, it starts to create that in our mind. And I love that, Greg Steer challenges me with this all the time, where he gets up and the first thing is like, hey, I was having a conversation with somebody this morning and, this is how it went. And I'm like, man, like, how do you do this? You know? And he's like, it was like 5 a.m. and, I was in line at 7-Eleven and I just asked, the like worker, like, hey, where are you from? And he's like, next thing you know, like, we were able to share the gospel. She trusted Christ. And it's like, what are you talking about? And so that just creates an urgency in me, where we see that. But, and I think we have this, I'm going to ballpark the statistic. You might actually know off the top of your head, but it's like 78% of kids who share the gospel saw an adult do it first. And so,
I don't remember the exact amount, but it was up there. It was like 70-80%.
Yeah. So if we model it, that's the biggest one.
And that's why I think it's important to model evangelism, not just model the Christian life.
Yes.
Because some people are like, well, like I try to live my life, so other people would, like I can
ask me what's different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember, I think I've shared this story with you. There was a pastor that, he became a Christian, radically saved, in college. And then he started living out, he's like, I'm just going to do my best, like to live out the gospel, like, and then if people ask me, then I'll be able to share with them, but I'm not really going to be vocal about it. And so he worked at a grocery store and just showed up to work on time, like worked really hard, like was very kind to everybody. Like, when everybody was kind of clocking in and milking the, the hourly system, whatever, like even when they're on breaks, they stayed clocking, he would like clock out. He was just, had a lot of integrity. And then one time he was in the break room with one of his coworkers and she was saying like, I've noticed that there's something different about you. And he's thinking like, yes, this is the opportunity. Like I get to finally share the gospel. And she goes, are you vegetarian? And we don't want to give the wrong impression of like, I remember I stopped and helped someone change a tire one time and started sharing the gospel with them. And they're like, I just believe more in humanity because of, there's still good people out there. I'm like, don't believe that. I was like, I only stopped because I love Jesus and like normally I'd be selfish and not stop. And so when it comes to, just living that model life, whatever, that's not like we're talking about modeling evangelism, like where you have personal evangelism and urgency for the gospel as someone who, wants to model that with others. So the way that you can practically do that is share your experiences of evangelism with the kids every program. So it's like, share. It's like, hey, like I was in 7-Eleven the other day and I, and I ran into the, and so, share who you're sharing with and lead them in that model. But then also we have once a month, we do go to Share Day where we go out and share the gospel in the community. And every time I take students, some of the time it's like their first time ever sharing and they're like terrified. And so I was like, okay, you're going to see me do 2 and then you're going to do 1. And they're like, okay. So like I'd go up and I'd talk and I was shocked by how much copying of exactly what I said.
Yep.
They're like using the same analogy or the same like words, like, and it's because literally they just learned how to do it right then. And then they used it and they're terrified. Like at first, like they're like, I don't know. And it's funny because we'll walk past someone like several times. And I'm like, no, why don't you go talk, and then they're like, okay. And then they'll just keep walking. I'm like, what happened there? So when it comes to even just modeling that, take students out to share the gospel in public. And you'll see them solidify their own faith in methods of doing that. Tell stories of impact. So we had recent story of impact from a student, a high school student who has been praying for her lost friend, sharing the gospel. She was able to come to church, and I had her get up and share that story with the whole group last week. And so share real life stories. And I think the testimonies of students who have shared the gospel successfully, and I'd say share the gospel successfully doesn't always mean that they led their friend to the Lord. Sometimes it's like, I spoke up and they haven't talked to me since. Like, share the good, bad, and the ugly so that you can see, that others can see and be inspired by the boldness. Yeah. But then one of the things that we teach our leaders is celebrate what you want to replicate. Mm-hmm. So if you're up there speaking and someone is talking in the back and you stop the program to address that, you're basically giving the attention to bad behavior. But if you were to make part of your program, hey, we're going to bring up someone and celebrate what the Lord is doing by them sharing the gospel, and celebrate what you want the students to be like, wow, if I do these things, like I'm this is what's part of the group. Like this is what we celebrate here. Make evangelism relatable.
Well, before you jump in, I want to say something on number 2. What would you say to somebody who says, okay, but isn't that kind of like, we don't want our left hand to know what our right hand's doing, and we really don't want to do this.
Just talking about giving.
Well, I understand. I'm saying there's this attitude sometimes where it's like, well, hey, we don't really want to.
We don't want to share it for public.
Correct. This should kind of be done here, or doesn't it? Maybe it kind of feels weird for you to say, well, I shared the gospel and this is how it went. Like, how do we respond to somebody who says that?
Yeah. ABCs of sharing is what we promote. So when students are sharing, we want to make sure that it's audible. So like that it's, people can hear what you're saying. So like if they get up and share in the crowd, whatever, or if they give her a microphone, brief, to make it very concise. It's not like, and you can tell students that just want attention. They're like, well, it all started when my parents were born. It's like, okay, what do we do? Yeah, it's like, and then the C is Christ-centered. Mm-hmm. So it's like, man, the Lord really provided this opportunity for me to share this week, and I just want to give all the credit to Him. Like, there's a difference in saying, like, look what I did versus like, the Lord is so kind that I got to share with my friend and represent Him to my friend. So I would just say, like, focus that. Like, don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, like, well, we should never do student testimonies because we're afraid that they might be arrogant. Yeah. It's like, well, then address the arrogance. Like, and most students aren't like, most students that are sharing aren't like,
they're boastful. Nervous to get up there to share about what they already shared.
Yeah. So that's not been a major issue for us.
Yep.
Make evangelism relatable. So teach students that sharing the gospel can be simple as sharing their testimony, inviting friends to church, youth group. Like, just make it like grease the tracks to make it easy or simple. Like show them it's like, I was just at 7-Eleven and the person in front of me didn't have enough money. So then I paid for them. And I was like, yeah, hey, God bless you. And, do you have any spiritual beliefs? Yeah. They're like, you could just do that. Like, when they see what's possible, they see what's possible, so it's like, yeah, you can change any conversation, at a restaurant and the waitress comes and brings your food and say, hey, we're about to pray for our food. Is there anything I can pray for you for? Yep. It's like, that has opened up way more gospel conversations. Like, I've had waitresses start crying when I ask that, it's like, no one's ever asked me that before, And so whatever it is, like show them how relatable it can be, just like your everyday life. It's like, hey, you don't have to be an evangelist. Like you don't have to go, buy a box and stand on it on the side of the street and start preaching for you to, be effective at sharing the gospel. Well, so bite-sized evangelism tools.
Yeah, I have a story on that too. So even last night at youth group, so every kid who walks in, we've walked through this a couple times, but like they'll hear the gospel multiple times every single night. And so I always love the opportunity because I'm not the first one to greet them. I'm normally hanging back. My volunteers are doing that. So when they come to me, it's like, okay, who brought you? And start, small talk. And then I say, hey, do you guys go to church anywhere on Sundays? Kind of like they might have come to our church for a long time for some youth group, or they might not. They might go to another church or nowhere. And so last time, this young girl, she was like, well, I've actually like my family's been going here for like years and years and years. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, so are you still trying to figure out what you believe about God, or do you know what you believe? She was like, well, I know what I believe. And I was like, oh, okay, well, cool. Well, would you mind, like, could I hear what you believe? And as I'm having this conversation, kids are checking in and like walking past. And 3 girls who've been a part of our ministry for a while, but they walk past and I just hear them like out of the corner, like over here, they're going in the room. And I just hear the one girl look at you like, did he just straight up ask, like, what do you believe? And it's almost like, I can't, like, you can just do that. Like, you can just ask. And it's like, yeah, like if you
get here's what I've learned too is like, if you make it a big deal, it is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so if you have it in your mind, it's like this Mount Everest occasion of like, oh my gosh, like everybody's just gonna, but just like if you make it someone's like, hey, like, I mean, one of the best ways I found, like even from people that I know, it's like, hey, you guys know that I'm a pastor, you know that I care about spiritual things, but like, I'm not sure what you believe. Like this is something that's so important in my life, like, but I'm just not sure where you are with the Lord or like what you believe about the Bible. Like, could you share that with me?
Yeah.
And like that opens, it's like a non-threatening, like just simple way of bringing up the gospel, even with people,
Yeah.
So those bite-sized evangelism tools, making it simple. And then, you know what I would say? Okay, so we've done a lot of these things. We've modeled evangelism. So I try to share story. We have students share their testimonies of how they've shared the gospel. We've tried to make evangelism relatable. I would say this number 4 is. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's not like I don't have like hard stats on this, but I would say this is probably one of the most effective ways that we've created urgency with our students. And it's this: create accountability. Like where, even so every time we have midweek small groups on Wednesday nights. And when I make our discussion guide from our message, like, so we do large group teaching and then we do small group, discussion. When they go into their small groups, the first question, and this has been like this for the past 2 straight years, the first question of every single small group is, did you share the gospel with anyone this week? Like, does anyone have any stories of how they share the gospel so they can share with their group? And just that question, just like, I mean, there's no effort on my part. I literally just copy and paste that question every single week. And when we first did it, super awkward.
Yes.
Like, it was like, crickets, like no one make eye contact with anyone because it's like, I don't want to realize, And now we have to cut it short. We're like, okay, guys, only 5 people can share. Like, and so we just have so many people that are sharing because they just know that that's what's going to be asked of them every week that they come. Now, there's sometimes when you provide accountability, then students never come back because they know that you're going to ask them and they know that they haven't done it. But at the same time, like accountability is a crucial element of sharing, of getting students to have that urgency and sharing, keeping it at the forefront. And then I'll say the number 5 is equip them with tools. If you think that evangelism is urgent and should be urgent, are you training them on how to do it? Like going back to the gospel advancing ministry values, is evangelism a priority in your ministry because it's reflected in your programs? So if you say evangelism is important, do you actually take time in your programs to train students on how to share their faith? There's tons of ways you can do this. So you can devote a whole program to that. You can, a whole, you can do a series on, walking through different worldviews and how to share the gospel with different types of people. We've done that before. I found a creative one is the role playing, like where you actually, we call it AAA Cafe. So
ad libs for Jesus.
Yeah, where you say like, hey, I want 2 people to come up in front of everybody. It's a little terrifying sometimes, but you always have students that are bold, that they'll come up and do it. And then they'll share, like they'll start a conversation about the gospel. They'll ask good questions. They'll admire what they can about their faith. They'll admit that they need Jesus just as they do. And then we kind of can pause, frame it, and say, okay, what would you guys say if it's stuck? It's like a safe environment where they're like, okay, I don't know what to say. It's like, okay, what would you guys suggest that they say in this moment? We have one student that acts like someone that they know that isn't a believer, so they can answer questions like, it's not just like all over the place, but they're like, how would this person that I know answer this question based on the responses that they think that they would answer with. But even just equipping them with tools and teaching them to. Another great resource is our student missionary training, where we do this for you. I mean, literally you can push play and allow us to teach, your students on how to share the gospel. It's a very concise thing. There's lots of great stuff from Dare to Share. All their digital curriculum is completely free. You can go on daretoshare.org/products and download stuff from there. You can do our student missionary training, which is edgeclub.org/training. And there should be no excuses of what it's like. What if I don't know how to teach them? Or it's like, what is it? And I would say the method that you use is the best one. So just teach them a method. We use the Life in 6 Words. You guys use
God, Us, Jesus, Trust, 4-part gospel.
Yeah, the 4-part gospel. So whatever one that you want to equip them with, but equip them with tools.
Yeah,
you can go through the Romans Road, the 4 spiritual laws. You can do the 1-verse method. There's tons, but don't get overwhelmed with options and don't do and not do any of them.
Yeah. Well, I would just simply say, if you're a youth pastor and your kids don't know how to share the gospel, that's a reflection on us and our programs. Now, if kids aren't sharing the gospel, that's not necessarily a reflection on us. But if they don't know how to, That is because we have failed to train them how to do it. So if ever you take any kid in our ministry and ask them, what is the gospel? If they've been there more than a couple times, they can share succinctly in under 2 minutes what the gospel is. Now, have all of them shared the gospel with the lost friend in the past week? No, because we can't control that. But we can make sure that every single time they come, they're hearing the gospel. So that way they're, as Peter says, always prepared to give an answer.
It's good. It's good. All right. So that concludes the 5 practical ways that we would inspire gospel urgency. So if you benefited from any of these, like, one of the 5 stick out to you, I'd love to know, and maybe we can even ask this in the school community as well. Just like, which one was like the biggest aha? I think that would be helpful for us. Just maybe we can even do a deep dive on one particular one of these practical ways to inspire gospel urgency. So we have modeling evangelism ourselves, tell stories of impact. So have students share real life stories, make evangelism relatable. So teaching them how to do it easily, simple, create accountability and encouragement, and then equip them with tools. So do evangelism training, gospel tracks, simple frameworks. Yeah, lots of good stuff. All right, so let's go into some 1-minute questions. So Ryne, you've had a lot of new believers in your youth ministry the past year. How many total? Is it 100
rolling 12 months, 104.
104 students have come to Christ as a result of your youth ministry, or result of the Lord, of
Absolutely.
course. But a lot of that's, through youth ministry, equipping students on how to share the gospel. I'm sure you have an answer for this question, but what is the best new believer resource that you've found?
So I'm sure I'm biased, but I believe we created the best new believer resource that's out there. Very simply, we created a new believer workbook that will, in 23 days, activate their faith, not just help them understand their faith. And so it walks through your new identity, your new purpose, your new king, and your new habits. And so in your new identity, we understand that my actions flow out of my identity. That's a biblical principle. And so we don't just want to have behavior modification. We want them to understand that if anybody is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old has passed, the new has come. And so the identity walks through that. And then we look at your new purpose. Well, now you have a reason for living. We kind of say it's like, have you ever walked into a room and then you forgot why you walked in there? That's frustrating. It's like, that's what life is like without Jesus. And so then we look at your new king, because a lot of times we see Jesus as the baby in the manger, which is absolutely true, but we neglect him as, the resurrected Christ who's seated on the throne. Yeah. And so that helps us understand this, the serious element of this faith, not just Jesus is a friend, which is true, but he's also King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then your new habits, putting that into practice so it actually permeates every area of your life. And so I'm biased, but I believe that would be the best one. And so if anybody wants to check that out, they can look at our school community. That's a free download. It's actually in a Canva template as well, so you can actually change it however you want. But I would say that would be. Which I was shocked at.
I mean, there's been different tools used, over the years and stuff, but I was shocked. Like when we really started looking into this, we're like, there's not like one that we would just be like, yes, this is the, this is the great, there's benefits of different ones, whatever. And so that was what we saw the need was, and it was like, okay, yeah, let's just create it ourselves and just give it away.
Yep.
For free. Yeah. Okay. So you have a question for me?
Yes. On today's topic, and we might be biased on this one too, but what is the best evangelism training tool you've used in your youth ministry?
Yeah, so Cutting Edge Ministry, we have created a student missionary training that covers the gospel urgency, gospel fluency, and gospel strategy of really focusing on equipping students to share the gospel. So we've seen incredible results. Some students, of course, like with anything, don't share the gospel at all after watching this. That's just a given. But the ones that really get it and really go, they're sharing the gospel weekly after that. And we're seeing just, a rapid multiplication happening. So we've traced it back to several generations of Christians just this calendar year of students leading their friends to the Lord, teaching them this method, and then rolling through it. And it's based, on Dare to Share's Life in 6 Words. So that's the gospel acrostic that we use. So you can even use the Life in 6 Words app as a tool for that as well. But yeah, I think our evangelism training can be effectively used to equip a lot of students on how to live out the gospel urgently.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, appreciate you guys taking time to watch. If you found any of this helpful, please like, share, subscribe. The best thing we can do is point you to our school community, which, as Keith mentioned earlier, is in the description below. So go ahead, click on that. Everything in there is free. We want nothing more than the gospel to go forward, but that'll be a place where if you have podcast episodes you'd like to hear more about, if you have questions, or if you feel like, hey, I've learned some things in student ministry, I would like to help pass these along as well. We do not have the corner on good ideas on youth ministry, and so we'd love for you to be a part of that. that. But hopefully today's episode was helpful in moving your students to apathetic to urgent, and when it comes to sharing the gospel. And we appreciate you guys watching.